Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
This evening our goal is to talk about the three letters that were purportedly written by John and the book of Revelation. We call this a course in Johannine literature. Do you remember again what the word Johannine means? Johannine, spelled with three N's, is the adjective for John. So in the same way that when we're talking about Mark, we use the adjective Markan, the Markan Gospel. Matthew, we use the adjective Matthean, the Matthean Gospel. Luke is the Lucan Gospel. For John, we're talking about the Johannine Gospel. But, as we've talked about before, there's not only the Gospel that was written by John, but if we look in the table of contents of our Bibles, we'll find four other books with the name John on them. We have the first letter of John, the second letter of John, the third letter of John, and then the book of Revelation, as we'll see in a moment, it also says that it was written by John. So the question for us becomes, were all five of these works written by the same John, or by different Johns, or by people whose name wasn't John? Their names weren't John, but they used the name John. Why? To be able to attribute their words to John. We talk about how it is that many of the books of the Bible are pseudonymous. Pseudonymous simply means that the Greek word pseudo means fake. Nomos is the word for name. They're written with a fake name. So that the letter Peter, the letter of Peter, the first letter and the second letter of Peter, were they really written by Peter? Those are pseudonymous letters that were attributed to Peter, that were written in Peter's name and in Peter's spirit and in Peter's authority. Some of the letters, too, that we previously attributed to Paul, we used to say a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Hebrews, or reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians, or to the Ephesians. Those letters weren't written by Paul, so we refer to them as pseudonymous letters. They're letters that are written in Paul's name, in Paul's spirit, and in Paul's authority.
So does Q encompass all the pseudonyms, or is Q its own?
Excellent question. So she's raising a question about Q, and who is Q, and is Q another pseudonymous work, and how does this fit with all this? Remember that there are various Gospels. There's the Gospel of Mark, which was the first to be written, which influenced both Matthew and Luke. So far, so good? That's three Gospels so far. These three are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels. Why? Because they all contain similar pictures of Jesus. John is very different, so John is not one of the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke share a lot of similarities. Why? Because Matthew and Mark both draw various stories from Mark, but they also draw various stories from a source that we haven't yet found that we call Q. What is Q? Q comes from a German word Quelle, which simply means source. There's an unknown source that we have not discovered that influenced Matthew and Luke in a way that Mark did not. So, for instance, the Our Father, have we heard of the Our Father? Is the Our Father in Mark? No. But it is in Matthew and Luke. Okay, so where did the Our Father come from? We attribute that to another source that we haven't discovered. The Beatitudes. The Beatitudes, are they in Mark? No. But they are in Matthew and in Luke. So where did the Beatitudes come from? There must have been some other source that we haven't yet discovered that we refer to as Q. Q is not a fake name that's attributed to that work. Rather, it's simply a code that we give to that work. There's got to be a source out there, we're going to call it Q, that influenced both Matthew and Luke. That's a great question. So actually, it's not a pseudonymous work. It doesn't have a fake name. We've given it a name, but it doesn't have a fake name in the same way that the letters of Peter, 1 and 2 Peter, we know that those are pseudonymous. Peter really didn't write those, but the person who wrote it said that they were written by Peter. So it's a work with a fake name.
So as we read more and more Catholic books, we're going to run into the Q. The writers are going to refer to the Q.
Excellent point. So the more that we read about Scripture and the history of Scripture, the more that we'll hear about Q which is short for
Yeah,
Kel.
because I had read about it several times, but I thought it was available,
There you go.
but it's not available.
It's not, we have not
It's an
discovered.
assumption that has been made.
It's a
The
theory.
source, there had to be a source, right?
That's right. So it's a theory, and we call it source theory. Where did these Gospels get their sources? The theory then of this source is that in order for Matthew and Luke to have certain things in common, then they must have gotten it from something, because it's not in Mark. The Our Father is not in Mark, but it is in Matthew and Luke. So how did that happen? Did one steal from the other? Did one copy from the other? Or did they both read some other source that we haven't yet found? So, the challenge we're going to have with these other works is that these, and even the Gospel of John we often refer to as a pseudonymous work, because even though it says that it's written by John, do we know that it's John who sat down and wrote it? It was written so long after Jesus that it raises questions.
How long is that, Father?
How long was this written after Jesus?
Oh, John,
The Gospel of John?
yeah, right.
We talked about how it is that the first Gospel, Mark, was probably written somewhere around 65 AD. The other Gospels followed somewhere between 70 to 85 AD, we usually date them. The Gospel of John we usually date to between 90 and 100, with some editing that took place after 100, with the final version being available somewhere around 110. So for instance, chapter 21, we talked about that before. Was chapter 21 originally part of the Gospel of John? No. Someone added that onto the end. They had to have a make-up story
So
between Jesus
they
and
probably researched Mark, Matthew, and Luke before writing John. So John is longer, and it was written later.
longer, later, and has a higher Christology. What does that mean for us? Is in John, is Jesus going to be human, or is Jesus going to be God? In John, Jesus is God. In Mark, Jesus is very human.
Historically, though, wouldn't it be said that the earlier, when Jesus was crucified, the ones that were written earlier had more truth in them, or more possibility of
More possibility of truth.
real history?
It's more likely that Mark, being written closer to the death of Jesus,
Right.
is more historically accurate
Right.
than John, that was written later. The farther we get away from something, if someone today were to sit down and write a story of Jesus, the farther we get away, the less likely it is to be true.
More adjectives.
The bigger the fish gets.
The bigger the fish story gets, right? Yeah. It was really this big, but the more we tell the story, the bigger that story gets, which is what we see in John. We see some good fish stories in John, literally and figuratively. So the longer after Jesus, the bigger the fish stories become, which is why by the time we come to the Gospel of John, we really have some incredible stories. So Jesus turning all of this water into wine, whoa, that's nothing we heard. These stories of Jesus being God in a way that we didn't see quite so much in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who saw Jesus more as an eschatological prophet.